Hi, I'm Matt Johnson, and this week of the Lenten Devotion Series, we are talking about patched cloth. Today I brought with me a quilt that was made by my grandmother. My grandma Tootie passed away about 3 years ago, and when she passed away, this was the only thing of hers that I asked to have. I remember her making this quilt throughout my teenage years and going over to visit her, and her always showing me the progress she was making and each little new square until finally, years and years later, she had enough to make this beautiful cathedral window quilt. This quilt means a lot to me for many reasons. One thing, the fabric in this quilt spans decades and generations of women in my family. This cloth was handed down from my great-great-grandmother to my grandmother and her mother, and then finally to my grandmother. So when I look at this quilt, I see decades and generations of women in my family. Second, I cherish this quilt because of the passion and dedication that my grandmother had for her craft and the thoughtfulness that she took with each stitch when she made this. And I think she did that knowing that this quilt and all the quilts she made were going to be handed down to her children and grandchildren and become part of her legacy. But most importantly, I look at this quilt and it reminds me of the most admirable trait of my grandmother, and that was her faith. My grandmother's life was not always easy, but no matter what was happening and in times of sadness and loss, she never wavered in her faith in God and in believing that God had a plan for all of us in her life and in our lives. So when I look at this, I think of her sitting at her quilting table with thread and needle and using that time as prayer time and time to meditate and time to talk to God about joys and sorrows alike. And I think that through that time and through that prayer, she was able to make beautiful works of art like this quilt. Today, this thread inspires me to remember my loved ones and the examples of faith that they set in my life, and to take time in my daily life to have prayer time with God. And I hope that it inspires you as well.